What is going on, psych students? It is me, Mr. Mori, and today we're going to talk about the Scarecrow, wrap him up. Hopefully you had enough time to watch both episodes and do the questions. I did go ahead and incorporate kind of like everything that would be on the psych eval sheet. I have incorporated into the discussion questions to make sure that that is happening. Right, so the last discussion page, you had to answer the question. You had to answer the question on what we decided Mr. Free's evaluation was, and there will also be a question today on what we decide Scarecrow's evaluation was, and there will also be space for you to answer, what you think the diagnosis is going to be for today's villain that has been elected. And yeah, I think that that's actually a pretty good way of making sure that you guys are actually doing this. And you know what? I'm actually happy to say that I think that more people are participating with this than with the previous module notes. Although the serial killer thing actually remains the video with the most views. I'm not surprised by that. It's very interesting stuff. I am pleased to say that this is actually receiving a decent amount of attention as well. If you hear birds chirping, that's because I have the windows open because it feels very lovely today on this wonderful Monday. Of course, you will be watching this on Tuesday, but nonetheless. So we started Scarecrow on Friday, so you had Friday and all of Monday, which is today when I'm filming this, to work on Scarecrow. So hopefully you have the time to enjoy him. He is, once again, my favorite villain. I just think there's a lot of potential there. And I don't know, I just think he's a really compelling villain. I think that his set of not really powers, but interests is very... I just think there's a lot of potential to have really dark and creepy storylines. Unfortunately, other than the Arkham Knight video game, he's not really been explored to his full potential. But again, the Arkham video game is pretty incredible. So I'll take it. I will take it. So I believe this is the last slide that we looked at before watching the episode. So let's go ahead and find out what exactly this man has. Jonathan Crane. So Scarecrow, through severe exposure to his own toxin, eventually loses the ability to fear. Also has the obsession with fear that prevents normal life. This is a phenomenon that is so rare, but does happen, that there is a lack of systematic research and classification. This has happened in real life. Patient SM, as they call it, Shay Mori, had damage to the amygdala, left her unafraid even at gunpoint. Because of this, Crane seeks to instill fear in himself and, of course, others. In which case, Batman is really the only person that can still do that. And so a lot of Scarecrow's later storylines are spent with him trying to basically just get Batman's attention so that he can still feel fear. Right? So, and so to do that, he must get Batman's attention in doing his best by instilling fear in others. He's basically a guy that's obsessed in instilling fear in other people and, of course, experiencing fear himself still. So there's a lot of good guesses with his diagnosis. If you guessed obsessive compulsive disorder, I mean, that's a pretty good educated guess. If you guessed antisocial personality disorder, I mean, there's potentially an argument for that, but I don't think that he has a lack of sympathy to that degree. Again, you can have symptoms of the disorder, but it doesn't mean that you have it. So like with Mr. Freeze, it was very, very obvious that he really experienced no remorse whatsoever. With Scarecrow, there's not really sufficient data to say that. Although, again, it's a pretty good guess. I'm not saying he doesn't have symptoms of that, but because he does seem to get pleasure out of watching other people suffer. But I don't know if that necessarily means that he feels no remorse about it or that he doesn't know that it's bad. But again, it doesn't really matter what I think, because I think he might actually classify with antisocial personality disorder in certain instances of the character. And some of you, that's what you put as your responses, and I commend you because I kind of agree with you. But what ultimately matters is what the licensed psychologist has to say about it. And he actually feels that Scarecrow does not have any, that you could argue antisocial disorder and insane if you have a good lawyer. But ultimately, the author and his wife, who's a psychiatrist, did not feel that there was an adequate information to officially diagnose him with the disorder. So, he does, however, fit this rare disorder that he's talking about for pretty much the entire Scarecrow diagnosis, and that is when somebody loses the ability to fear and is obsessed with fear. But there's not a name for it yet, right? So I know that might be a letdown for some of you, but I can't change the diagnosis. I mean, it is what it is. So to make it fun, what I want you to do, and on the discussion page, I'm just going to say answer the hidden question within the notes, and that is this, okay? I want you to make up a name for the disorder and have fun with it, Have fun with it. Make up a name for this disorder that is specific to Scarecrow and the very few other people that have had it in real life. So, again, you could argue antisocial disorder if the psychologist wants to lean in that way, and the author does address that. As far as sanity, Scarecrow is really up for debate. The thing is, I don't know if I don't think that he does know that what he's doing is wrong. I think that he's purely justified in the same way that Mr. Freeze thinks he's justified. So with Scarecrow, it's really up to you on the sanity and whether or not he has a good lawyer. Because again, sanity is determined in the court of law. So there's really not a right or wrong answer on Scarecrow for his sanity. But again, if you have a good lawyer, you could definitely argue that. I personally think he's insane, but that's my personal opinion on it. The treatment for this disorder that doesn't even have a name, would be drugs, maybe, but we'd have the fear that the drugs is kind of the source of the problem, so maybe we don't want to go there. Maybe experimental treatments and definitely psychotherapy. But yeah, you could also make a very strong case that he is sane. It's one of those things where it really would come down to the court of law. All right, so now we are going to head up to our Batman part for the day. All right, so let's see. We're going to do... Yeah, okay. Yep. We're going to see Bane today. We're not going to watch an episode on Bane, but some of the villains just come along naturally in the notes and they don't have episodes for them, kind of like what we did with Doctor Strange. So today we're going to look at a superstitious and cowardly lot, criminal nature. So criminals are superstitious, cowardly lot. So my disguise must be able to strike terror into their hearts. I must be a creature of the night, black and terrible. Those are Batman's words. The excerpt on page 90 is not really all that important. Basically, it's just kind of introducing the topic, which I've already done. So he kind of talks about how maybe criminals aren't necessarily superstitious, which I would actually argue that they are, personally. But he says, what about cowardly, though, which requires greater fearlessness, doing the right thing or breaking the law. Low fear of punishment reduces the effectiveness of some deterrence against crime. That to say that basically what he's saying is, if you know the punishment for robbing a bank is prison and a heavy fine, maybe that would deter you from robbing a bank. So he's saying if criminals were really so cowardly, would they have the guts to rob a bank? I would say, personally, I think it's more of an element of stupidity in wanting to rob a bank, that you think that robbing a bank is going to fix your problems, that temporary small-time solution, and which has a great risk. So I think that the stupidity almost ignores the courage of it all. Like, they're so dumb that, like, the courage isn't really a factor because either they're desperate or they're too egotistical or dumb to realize that this isn't a good idea. So that's my personal take on it. He seems to think that it takes a lot of guts to do what criminals do. And I was like, well, it actually is pretty cowardly because they don't have the balls to, I don't know, get a job and be a responsible adult. They're looking for the quick fix, which shows unintelligence, laziness, which goes with unintelligence, and I think cowardness. I don't think it takes a lot of guts. Now, that being said, if me or you, an average Joe, were to rob a bank, I don't know about you, but I would be very nervous. I'd be pretty, when I get nervous, I get pretty superstitious, as it, like where Michael says, I'm not superstitious, but I am a little stitious. Or like I'll do like the knock on wood thing, even though I know it's ridiculous, I still do it because, it's like what if, right? But I think that if the average Joe were to be robbing a bank, they're going to be pretty nervous. They're going to have some butterflies in their stomach. They might have thought it was a good idea, but then you get up and start doing it, and you're like, oh, man, this is terrible, right? So I have a disagreement with the author here. I'm sorry that I'm blocking the Michael Scott meme. So I take issue with the author at this point. He asks the question if criminals are a cowardly lot, but skips the common criminals that Batman would face on an average night and goes directly to the sociopath and psychopaths like the Joker, which I think isn't fair because when Batman first set out and you don't see a lot of episodes in comic books of him fighting average criminals because that's boring. But if you read the comic books, if you watch the TV shows, the movies, you do get the semblance that through dialogue, that he does most nights just fight average criminals. So I think for the author to skip that is really kind of stupid and unfair, and I don't like it, and I have a pretty strong disagreement about his approach to that. So in reality, these two groups of people are not cowards because they psychologically are simply not afraid. And he's talking about the psychopaths. But I think what Batman meant in this quote is the common criminal, an average person. The quote I'm referring to is this one up here. Criminals are a superstitious and cowardly lot. So he uses the Joker and the Scarecrow and things as an argument to say that they're not superstitious and cowardly. So I'm arguing that I think Batman meant in his quote the common criminal, an average person driven to do something illegal by extraordinary circumstances, like the guy who shot Bruce's parents. I mean, that's where all this is stemming from. Think about it. If me or you were to rob a bank or participate in a murder, we'd be pretty scared and superstitious. I don't think Batman imagined in the beginning that he'd be fighting people like the Joker. So when we're looking at, the title of the chapter is a superstitious and cowardly lot, criminal nature. If we're looking at criminal nature from a psychological perspective, I think it's important to first analyze real-life criminals, because the fact is the Joker's not real, Mr. Freeze is not real, and for the vast majority of Batman's career, he's fighting average criminals. So I don't think it's fair what the author does, and he goes immediately to use these psychopaths as an argument that criminals aren't superstitious, because I would argue that the average criminal, which is, like me or you, an average person driven to do something illegal by extraordinary circumstances, we'd be pretty nervous and pretty superstitious. I don't know about you, but if I was trying to mug somebody in Gotham City, I'd be looking over my shoulder thinking, like, is Batman about to break my arm and beat me into a pulp and give me a concussion? I don't know. It would certainly work on me. Maybe you think it wouldn't work on you, but I doubt it. Come on, let's be honest. It's like what I was saying. You think, oh yeah, robbing a bank, no problem. But then when you're actually doing it, it's like, crap, So then he goes on to randomly start, looking at criminal nature. What is more likely to be a criminal, an introvert or an extrovert? So he introduces this topic, and then he goes away from it, and then comes back to it. And that's exactly what I'm going to do. I follow his format very closely in these notes. So introvert, extrovert, does it make a difference? Regardless of an individual's designation as extrovert or introvert, the villainy of all major bat foes grows out of their respective social interests and resentments, such as Poison Ivy and plants, Mr. Freeze and Winter, Scarecrow and Fear, Joker and clowns. Why else would they commit their crimes wearing outrageous outfits? So he's saying that in terms of these super criminals, it doesn't really seem to matter that much, introverted or extroverted. If you don't know what that is, an introvert is somebody, It doesn't mean you don't like people. It just means that people make you tired, and that when you need to recharge, being by yourself is how you do that. And if you're an extrovert, being by yourself is not it. You think it's awkward. You don't like silence. You get your energy from being around people. This quarantine thing is probably driving you cray-cray, whereas introverts are probably, like myself, loving the majority of it. I don't necessarily love being cooped up in a house. You can still go out places without talking to people. That's what movie theaters are for. I am so happy that movie theaters are a part of the stage 1 of the reopening process of the coronavirus. I need my movie theater popcorn. I need it. I need it. I'm just thinking of the last time I went to the movies and Marissa made that popcorn for me with the extra butter. It was amazing. And I want more popcorn. I do. I have a problem. Anyway, moving on. Maslow's hierarchy of needs. According to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, this is actually very interesting to me. This is like some deep level psychology. This is what I mean by, like, there are things in this Batman unit that are not in the textbook. Like, it allows us to get into things that I think are actually like super interesting that we otherwise wouldn't be able to get to. So Maslow, who we did cover in the first module, but we didn't really get into much depth. He has this pyramid of needs that people have to meet, and it goes along with your psychological development from basically being like a child to an adult. So Maslow said that we work our way up in the pyramid from the most basic needs, and that deficiencies in these lower levels of the pyramid will require too much of our time. If they require too much of our time, attention, and effort, that we won't reach the higher levels of the pyramid. For us to progress smoothly into higher levels with more advanced psychological functioning, people stuck in the lower levels fixate on their deficits even after meeting basic needs, choosing to focus on whatever they still don't have instead of appreciating what they do so they can flourish as human beings. That being said, that if a person by a certain age does not get higher in the pyramid, they will be essentially stuck there psychologically. And I do have this pyramid for you to look at on the next slide. So Catwoman's poverty, Poison Ivy's timidity and familial neglect, Penguin's physical deformities. During their respective childhoods, they were bullied and didn't get some of their basic needs, especially Catwoman. She pretty much lived on the streets her entire childhood. As adults, they seek fulfillment through earthly pleasures, thrills, flings, and earthly pleasures, right? They can't comprehend those higher level psychological functions because in their developmental stages of their brain, they were stuck worrying about those basic needs. So criminal behavior can emerge among those who have grown frustrated over unmet needs or among those who choose to stay mired in a lower level on the pyramid, simply wanting more and more constantly. According to Maslow, psychopaths hunger for basic needs so much that they cannot understand love any more than a blind person can comprehend the color red. So that to say, like, the development with this pyramid is very, very important, and if you don't reach the higher level, you actually have a statistically higher chance of being a criminal because you don't have these higher level functions. So the first bottom two are safety needs and psychological needs, physiological needs, my bad. These are basically a roof on your head and food and water, right? So if somebody's not having those met during the ages in which the brain is developing, which would be really from age 0 to about like 24, I believe, is the cutoff for males. I think females it's like 21. If they're not getting those two basic needs, then they will always be fixated on those needs, and they'll always be looking for the easy way, like robbing the bank. They physically, mentally, really, they can, but it's very difficult for them to process, hey, getting a job is actually the better route. Like, they're so concerned with their immediate need to feed and to have shelter, that they're not able to advance in the pyramid. And to give an example of that, you can look at the early stages of evolution. In that, in archaeological findings, they find that evidence of religion does not emerge in the soil until the agricultural revolution. Not to say that when people, Homo sapiens and Neanderthals and all the different species of Homo sapiens before they died out, when they were hunter-gatherer societies, they did not have religion because they were in these lower two categories. They did not have the brain capacity to understand and think about the questions of, well, why am I here? Right? So because they were so worried about what's for dinner, the brain, because they were hunter-gatherer societies, the brain was not allowed to develop higher in the hierarchy of needs. But once they discover the ability to chisel tools like obsidian into things that can make farming more of a realistic option, because before it wasn't a realistic option. You couldn't farm properly if you didn't have the right kind of tools. But whenever the Neolithic era, like they start to discover that you can chip weaker rocks with harder rocks, they can make tools, then they start to, like, farming becomes a legitimate option for humans. And so you see the agricultural revolution where people stop being hunter-gatherer societies and they start being farming communities, right? And you need not look any further. You look at Europe, which turned into a farmer, agricultural-centered society, and then you look at the Americas, where people, at least in North America, stayed hunter-gatherer societies. And you can see that there's a definite difference in the development of the societies. I mean, when the Europeans showed up in the Americas, they were still using sticks and stones, like stones attached to sticks. They had some farming tools. I mean, there were like the Aztecs, in which were mainly agricultural, but not so much in North America. So, you kind of begin to see the pattern of Maslow's hierarchy of needs throughout history, right? So whenever people do begin the agricultural revolution in Europe, the Middle East, and Asia, you start to find digging in the dirt, brain fart, archaeology, you begin to see idols and different objects of worship emerging. And that's because when people have more food, because farming produces more food than being a hunter-gatherer, they're not as worried about what's for dinner. They have a roof over their head because they now have a farm instead of following a herd with portable homes like a teepee, right? So they have more time that they don't have to spend on wondering what's for dinner and being worried about that and fixate on that. They can begin to ask the questions of, why am I here? What is this place? Why do we exist? And so you see the development of religion, and you also see the human brain developing further and the species of Homo sapien becoming more and more advanced. So we see the next stage, belongings and love needs, intimate relationships and friends, esteem needs, prestige, and feeling accomplishment. Some of my students, I don't think, have reached that level. Not you guys, of course, my World Civ kids. I had a kid today email me saying that he just quits, that he's just going to fail. He'll see me next year. I'm like, I told you exactly what you could do to pass. Apparently, having a feeling of accomplishment doesn't really matter to him. All right? Self-actualization, achieving one's full potential, including creative activities and ideas. So I think that's a really, really in-depth thing that we get to look at in the Batman unit that we wouldn't otherwise get to look at. Like someone to have the psychological development to understand that the things that give you a true feeling of accomplishment are things that take time. Like when the feeling I get when I finish a book, it is amazing. I mean, it is like the greatest, other than like getting married or things like that, which relationships falls into this category. But that sense of accomplishment of something that I created, I spent the time I created. I didn't rush it. I understood that if I invest time in it, it's gonna the more time you invest in something, when it's done, it equals a greater feeling of accomplishment. Case in point, I'll go ahead and show you guys this now. This is my book cover. This is a rough draft. We're still working on. I think I'm going to darken these colors a bit so that they don't blend in with the background so much. But it feels really good to have this illustration done, to have the cover ready, and my Indiegogo campaign is up. It's doing okay. We'll see if we get to the end goal, but this feels good, right? And a criminal, someone who's stuck in the bottom tier of the hierarchy of needs, doesn't understand that. As they said, at the extreme case of a psychopath, according to Maslow, psychopaths hunger for basic needs so much that they cannot understand love any more than a blind person comprehends the color red. Right? So psychopaths are stuck in this, definitely. They are all about earthly pleasures and immediate pleasures. They usually have drug addictions. They usually have sex addictions. And you see that same thing with criminals. Not to say people that usually have very strong drug addictions are also usually stuck here as well. And I'd say that their drug addiction usually leads to a lot of financial issues as well. But I've already gone over how drugs cost a lot of money. Nature versus nurture. Villains whose backgrounds and characteristics mirror Batman's depict the power of nurture, determining whether a person becomes a hero or a villain by rearranging the circumstances of the Dark Knight's origin. There is one villain in particular called Prometheus. Yeah, where Bruce Wayne's parents were shot by a criminal in front of him. Prometheus' parent was killed in front of by a cop. So you can kind of see how that would lead them in different directions. This is tying into Module 20, which was nature versus nurture. Of course, you could argue the biological differences are there too. Again, with nature versus nurture, there are certain biological tendencies and predispositions. Doesn't mean you can't overcome your nature, but it's more difficult depending on your genetical code and the environment that you're raised in. So now he goes back to talk about the introverts and extroverts, and that just to say, when you don't see old people in gangs, right? That to say that extroverts usually outgrow their immaturity. You don't really typically see 50 or 80-year-olds robbing banks, and that's not just because they are less physically capable, because 50-year-olds are totally physically capable in some cases. It's because their brains develop and they kind of grow out of it. So juvenile socialized offenders who commit antisocial acts as part of a group activity, hence extroversion, usually have age-appropriate friendships, show concern for the welfare of their friends and gang members, and are unlikely to betray friends by informing on them. Few youngsters of the group type remain delinquent past adolescence, usually meaning that they grow out of it. However, introverts, non-socialized juvenile offenders with conduce disorder exhibit more bullying, physical aggression, and other cruelty towards adults as well. Sheer callousness, flat disregard for others' feelings. They kind of feel like a loner, right? Or well-being is their most striking feature. These traits can grow as they get older, meaning they're just bottling it all in and developing resentment. That doesn't mean that introverts are all serial killers, but there does seem to be a pattern that people that hold it all in might tend to be a little bit more aggressive and bitter, which could theoretically grow into something more dangerous. I'm an introvert, and I have never killed somebody. I promise on my soul, I have never killed anybody that I'm aware of, right? I don't know, maybe, I don't know, I don't think how would that, it would have to be very unknowingly. Why am I talking about this? That I'm aware of, I've never caused inadvertently anybody's death, and I certainly haven't done it directly. So where does evil come from? We're not really sure. Imbalances in the amygdala, which is that part of the brain that deals with anger and a lot of your emotions, seems to have a startling effect. Chemical imbalances in the amygdala and other neural regions that process how we feel about others could conceivably lower the recipient's empathy, and among individuals with either inherited or environmentally created psychopathic potential, raise the odds that they grow up evil. That to say, people that are usually psychopaths or sociopaths have imbalances in their amygdala. Psychopathy, sociopathy, aka antisocial personality disorder, dissocial personality disorder, sadism, adult antisocial behavior are terms psychological professionals use to try to identify evil. That to say that the terms sociopathy, psychopathy, antisocial personality disorder, these are terms that are specifically in the psychological field to label evil in a nice way. It's like I could say, hey, you failed, you're fired, or I could say, hey, you almost made the cut, we're going to have to let you go. One of them sounds nicer than the other. All right, so what is the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath? We've already talked about this. I used to save this for the Batman unit exclusively, but I saw the benefit in just bringing it up earlier and teaching it to you more than once. That to say that they're pretty similar, but it's really the difference between Mr. Freeze and, say, the Joker. But for the record, I'm not saying the Joker is a psychopath, but people typically tend to view him that way. I'm also not denying that he is one. All right. So there are very similar but different. But the difference is like the difference between Mr. Freeze and Joker. Mr. Freeze kills and commits crimes with a lack of conscience, but he does it for a purpose and only when he needs to, kind of like a hitman. He does have some conscience, must be Jiminy's weird cousin that he ignores a lot. I think the author wrote that. Freeze also exhibits strong antisocial characteristics. He's very isolated. The Joker kills and enjoys it. He isn't nervous. He likes it. He is unreliable, untruthful, unloving, manipulative, and can be charming very often, hence why Harley Quinn falls for him. And he has no conscience. The Joker is evil. He's a psychopath, maybe. Whereas Mr. Freeze would be a sociopath. Again, it's that difference between a hitman and an axe murderer. Neither of them feel any remorse about what they've done. They might still know it's wrong, by the way, with terms of insanity. The hitman does it because it's what they got to do. Mr. Freeze got to save his wife. If somebody gets in his way, he's going to take him out, and he doesn't feel bad about it, but he doesn't enjoy it. The Joker is going to kill somebody because he thinks it's funny. So that's the difference between sociopath and psychopath. So is there hope for them? Because there aren't, in terms of psychopaths, they usually don't find their own behavior to be disturbing, and they actually usually think that everybody else is wrong. So they usually don't ever identify themselves, and you can't really work with them if they don't think anything is wrong with them. So it's really hard to motivate psychopaths to fix themselves because a lot of times they think that they're right and everybody else is wrong. You look at the character of the Joker, he thinks, well, everybody else is bad, right? He thinks society is wrong and that he has to prove to them that they're wrong. It is important to note that psychopathy is not an official DSM diagnosis. It falls under antisocial personality disorder. They used to have it called psychopathy, but they've since combined them together in antisocial personality disorder. I include them both in this unit, and the author includes them in the book because it helps classify the difference further. All right, to wrap up today, before we get to our villain that was chosen today, we're going to briefly talk about Bane. Why would you shoot a man before tossing him from a plane? I was wondering what would break first. Your spirit or your body? I love Bane. So, the Bane in The Dark Knight Rises is pretty different than the Bane in the comic books, and I'm going to say that's a good thing, because Bane in the comic books is a little bit less interesting. I do think the Bane in The Dark Knight Rises did make the character in the comic books more interesting. It gave him more layers. Before The Dark Knight Rises, he really was just kind of a muscle man, a South American, usually I think Brazilian. who is really just a muscle man. But The Dark Knight Rises really changed him into more of a mercenary, more of an intelligence. Like, if you watch the Batman and Robin with Mr. Freeze and George Clooney, Bane's just muscle. He can't even talk. And that's really what the villain was for a long time. Dark Knight Rises really made the character evolve. So a corrupt court system imprisons a woman in a hellish South American prison. Bane is her child. He's born there. Bane grows up among killers and madmen. He plays with rats for toys, gets training to fight from 2 warrior parents, and education from visiting priests, warrior priests. At the age of 8, when Bruce is losing his parents, meanwhile Bane is committing his first murder. So you can see the parallel there. He rises through murder and much fighting to be the king of the convicts in his prison. Later, he takes a drug called Venom, which pumps through his veins and makes him even stronger. It's like super steroids. Talk about stretch marks. They never address the stretch marks in the movies or anything, though. Other comic books. The Venom's not even in The Dark Knight Rises. They wanted to have a really realistic take on it, but it basically makes you very muscular, as you can see in some of the iterations of Bane. So he comes to Gotham because Bane is he wants to be the best warrior. So when he hears that there is this Batman figure in Gotham, he has to go there and challenge him to prove that he is better. And so Bane is essentially the muscle challenge to Batman, kind of like Doomsday is to Superman. He first appeared in 1993 in Batman Vengeance of Bane #1. His real name is unknown. We actually don't know his real name. I don't know of any instance where it is actually told what his name is. So here you can see the guy is like really roided up. This is because he has the Venom like Hulk sized. Without the Venom, he's still quite muscular, but he's not quite Hulk sized. Alright, that's just a funny look of him that I like, because Scarecrow's like piggybacking off of him, and Scarecrow's got like these creepy fingers. I don't know. I like it. I have that comic book, but you know, the conclusion was kind of lame, though. I didn't really like it in the end. Sometimes, you know, you have a comic book that looks really good and you think it's going to be awesome, and then the end disappoints you. So does Bane have a disorder? He does seem to have a strong, I don't know why need is capitalized, for achievement. Everything he does seems to be driven by some need to overcome obstacles or surpass others. This, however, does not qualify for any disorders. Bane should get some help for that drug addiction, though. Suggested media for Bane, because he doesn't have his own case study sheet, would be Batman Nightfall, which is what you see right here. That's where Bane breaks Batman's back. It's a very iconic comic book. And The Dark Knight Rises, which is what this is from. Tom Hardy. That's where my voice impersonation comes from. You know, like, I'm on your schedule, Doctor. You know, he talks like that. It's kind of funny, but I like it. And I don't really think there's any question on his sanity, to be honest with you. Alright, so tomorrow we're going to look at why all the costume freaks. We're going to look at the specific, you know, why are there villains like this? Like, what's the psychology behind a villain like that? Two-Face. Two-Face is the one who won the election, alright? So let's go ahead and meet Two-Face. So you should have already filled out Scarecrow's sheet, you know, so you should have been able to fill that out now. Which, by the way, I just want to say, like, the hint that maybe his Scarecrow's disorder was not, you know, label any present disorders, treatment. I know that somewhere in here it gives you a hint that his thing is not actually listed. Two-Face. This will give you a hint, although I will not lie to you, this is pretty darn easy. In fact, the episode actually comes right out and tells you which disorder he has, basically. So if you watch the episode and you don't catch the disorder, I don't know what's wrong with you. So good suggested readings for that would be Batman The Long Halloween, Batman Dark Victory, Eye of the Beholder, Year 1, Two-Face, Year 1, Volume 1, and Volume 2. Batman Forever and The Dark Knight. The Dark Knight is definitely the best movie adaptation of him. As far as the cartoons, we're going to watch the best cartoon episodes for him. The Long Halloween is actually my favorite comic book ever written. So I would definitely suggest that. I would say, like, even if you don't like comic books, that it's worth a read. The Long Halloween is a true detective story, so it's very interesting. You don't really know who did it until the end, and I really like that. So you want to go ahead and do his description. Fill in the left side today. This is what his sheet looks like, right? And you'll fill in the right side in tomorrow's video. All right, so the origin of Harvey Dent first appears in Detective Comics 66 in 1942. Differs in details. We're going to go with the one in the Batman the Animated Series. All right, so if you're watching The Dark Knight, you're actually not going to see the same disorder that you'll see in the Harvey Dent in the episode that we're going to watch. But for the sake of it being more fun, we're going to use the animated series because I don't think he actually has a disorder in The Dark Knight. So Harvey Dent is the district attorney, and he is a really good one. He's really known for cleaning up the streets and kind of being the white knight or the bright knight of Gotham. If you end up watching The Dark Knight, whenever I suggest it for the Joker, you'll see exactly what I mean. But when Dent is, that should be capitalized, is mutilated, bad things break out. Sometimes the accident is from acid in the face, others from an explosion. Dent, having no faith in the system anymore, sees a chance as the only true form of, sees chance, the flip of a coin, heads or tails, as the only true form of justice. The only morality in a cruel world is chance, unbiased, unprejudiced, fair. So anytime Two-Face is going to do something or kill somebody, he will flip a coin, and if it lands on heads, you're good. If it lands on tails, he's going to shoot you. So everything is up to chance. This is his appearance, and I'm going to go ahead and, well, I'm going to have linked in the Canvas page what his questions are. So that is today's video. Two-Face does have 2 episodes. You probably wouldn't need to watch both to get his diagnosis, but there will be discussion questions for both episodes, so I'd go ahead and watch both. Today's stuff, I would spend the rest, we're going about 44 minutes here. I'd spend the rest of the time doing the Two-Face episodes that would constitute the hour and a half that this class normally takes in school. If any pattern is to say anything, I would believe that tomorrow we would be doing the Riddler because he got the second most votes this time. So make sure you vote and you answer discussion questions. You watch the Two-Face video and have a wonderful, wonderful Two-Face kind of day.